That's good.
Welcome to another episode of Angels, Positivity and Love. Amazing experts the world over, incredible backgrounds, sometimes New York Times bestsellers, or I should say these days, Amazon bestsellers, healers, professors, Delta Force operator, doctors, psychologists, you name it, Miss USA, all sorts of folks, but they've paid attention and they paid attention to the universe. You could call it universal wisdom or just what life has been bringing them. They've slowed down enough usually to get out of thinking to cultivate their unique life path. And by doing so, they usually end up helping others. Today, we've got Gregory Shushan, who's joining us, a very famous near-death experience researcher, I would say globally acclaimed, well-known. He was in the Shift Network Beyond the Veil Summit that I was lucky enough to participate with him in. There were 30 or 37 of us as experts. I think it was 2 years ago in the fall. But I'd like to welcome Gregory to the show. He's absolutely got an incredible university background. Again, the number of books he's done and so on. So I feel very fortunate to having him on Angels, Positivity, and Love. Gregory, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Michael. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Could you give the audience a little bit about your, CV and so on? You do have a very meticulous, incredible background. You've done a lot of grants. You're an adjunct professor here, research fellow there, and it's a long trail of accomplishments that you have under your belt.
Sure, yeah, I'll try not to be too boring about it, but I started out in archaeology, first Eastern Mediterranean, which is Greece and Egypt and the Mesopotamian area, and then kind of focused in on ancient Egypt and did a first degree in Egyptian archaeology. And then I branched out from there. I got the idea to do this cross-cultural comparison of afterlife beliefs in relation to near-death experiences. So I embarked on that with a MA in research methods for the humanities. This was all at University College London, by the way. And then that expanded into a PhD, which was broadening the comparison with additional civilizations um, in relation to near-death experience in the afterlife. After the PhD, then I continued on and went to Oxford and did a postdoctoral research fellowship, and that was to compare near-death experiences in indigenous religions around the world. And then did various other things, started a publishing imprint and published another book called The Next World, which brought in mediumship and reincarnation a little bit. And now I'm doing, yeah, a little bit of teaching. You mentioned I'm an adjunct professor at Marian University in Wisconsin, doing some online teaching in their thanatology program. I'm a visiting research fellow at Winchester University in the UK. And the main project I have going on is I've started a second PhD because I guess I enjoy some kind of masochism, intellectual masochism in my life. And this is on near-death experiences in classical antiquity. So mostly Greece and Rome, a little bit of early Judaism and Christianity. And that's kind of zooming in and narrowing down on the different kinds of attitudes that people had to NDEs in these cultures, and also looking at the NDEs themselves to see how they might compare to ones in different civilizations and our own society as well.
Fascinating. And how would you describe your first approach to this when you got started? And would you say that you've kept a pretty open mind this entire time?
Yeah, the first approach really was well, how it started was when I was doing the Egyptian archaeology degree, where you have to learn hieroglyphs, which is a pretty complicated thing. And so one of the things we were doing is reading the ancient books of the afterlife, so the Book of the Dead, and in my case, mostly the pyramid texts and the coffin texts, which are the precursors to the Book of the Dead, going way back to the Old Kingdom. And the Middle Kingdom was the coffin texts. So as I was reading these, I started coming across these descriptions of the afterlife experience, what it's like when a soul dies and goes to the other world. And I just started thinking about them in general terms in relation to near-death experiences, because you leave the body, you enter darkness, you come out into a realm of light where the sun god is there, and the sun god is obviously a being of light. There's a judgment. The being of light assists in this judgment. And then you have this kind of transcendent experience where you're become divinized, you become one with the deities that you're interacting with. And another actually really interesting thing from Egypt as far as NDE goes. There was a scene in the coffin text where the soul enters this one particular chamber, and in this chamber they discover the corpse of the god Osiris. And the text goes to great extremes, great lengths to make sure that you understand that you are Osiris. That you are one and the same with the god of the underworld. So the encounter with that corpse of Osiris is an encounter with yourself, with your own corpse. And I think that is a kind of symbolic description of an out-of-body experience.
Mm,
Because seeing that corpse and realizing that you're alive yet still dead is or sorry, that you're dead yet still alive,
mm,
is the thing that enables you to proceed in the underworld. And it's just like in modern near-death experiences where people will be described wandering around the accident site or whatever happened to them, and they don't understand that they're actually dead and outside the body until they see their body there, and then that makes them realize exactly this new state of reality that they're in.
mm.
So yeah, and as far as keeping an open mind, I yeah, I very much have. I haven't pursued this from like a parapsychological or theological sort of perspective. It's really more about the degree to which near-death experiences impact people's belief in an afterlife in different cultures around the world. And in some cases, they've actually rejected them in certain African societies and certain Micronesian societies. So there's a lot of cultural diversity in the way people actually look at them, even people who experience them themselves.
Hmm. Fascinating. Can you talk to us about ancient Greece, especially like Plato had a lot of views on the afterlife, and I know there's better terminology than that, but can you get into that a little bit, or are we just getting started on those studies?
Yeah, I am sort of just getting started. It's a 3-year project, just to give an idea of super narrow focus on that, going back to all the original ancient texts, then looking at what all the ancient people thought about those ancient texts. So with Plato, there's the myth of it's known as a myth, but whether it really is a myth, in the way we understand the term, who knows? Back then, it just kind of meant a tale or a story. But yeah, that's one of the world's earliest near-death experience type narratives. Was a soldier and he died on the battlefield and then he came back to life, I think 12 days later. And then he gave this, kind of mind-bending, detailed story about his experiences in the other world where he meets um, different Greek divinities. He meets the Fates, and he sees what he calls the spindle of necessity, which is this giant sort of wheel that's it's responsible for keeping the cosmos and the universe functioning correctly. And then he's taken on a sort of Dante-esque tour of the other world, which I say Dante-esque, even though it's, a good 1500 years or more before Dante. Um, and he sees sufferings of people, and he's told how our behaviors will help determine the kind of afterlife we have. And then, as far as particular relevance to your show, he also meets angels, in fact, and he's told that people in the other world choose the angel that they want to be their guardian in their next life because is claiming that there's reincarnation, and so it's a matter of choice rather than like drawing lots. He specifies. He wants us to know that this is not just a random kind of assignment, but you actually choose the angel that's going to accompany you into your next life.
Mm.
So,
Well,
so
let's tackle that for a second, or at least a little bit of an offshoot. The concept of past lives. We've got in the modern day, we've got Brian Weiss and all his studies, and regression therapy or whatever it's called.
right.
I'm not one for terminology, but I do know which way to point the arrow. So past lives, personally, when you first got into all this research, the studies, you took this on. Where were you personally on the concept of past lives? Did you have no opinion? Were you firmly against it? But by now you're worn down and you had to throw up the white flag and you're like, maybe.
Um, yeah, good question. I think I've always been maybe. I've never been like I guess I've always kind of had the attitude that if I don't know something, I'm not going to believe it. So in some ways, like the concept of belief is a little bit alien to me. I didn't grow up, in a kind of religiously enculturated household. Um, in fact, my mom kind of took efforts to expose us to all different religions. So we go to a Buddhist temple and we go to dance with the Hare Krishnas, and then my grandmother was a Catholic and Jewish family on my dad's side. So I had this kind of comparative religion background growing up, with a lot of respect and interest in all of them, but never like this idea that this one is true or this one is false. So I think that that kind of primed me to be able to look at these different religions around the world objectively, and also these different kinds of beliefs like reincarnation. Um, and that's a tricky one because you have Ian Stevenson, for example, at University of Virginia, Jim Tucker, who has kind of taken up the mantle. There's a Japanese scholar named Okado Masayuki who's just published a book about Japanese reincarnation cases. And these are level-headed, qualified scientists, psychiatrists. Okado is a linguist in Japan. I mean, super, super intelligent, accomplished people. Um, and when they look into it, they pretty much come down on the side that there's something there, that there's probably, some fact behind these reincarnation memories. And I don't feel like I have the expertise to say, no, you're wrong, because I mean, I'm not going to say that to a quantum physicist or to a biologist or whatever. It's not my field. But what I have read and what I've, looked at from these accounts, I find some of them, pretty compelling and interesting. I'm open to the possibility that there's alternative explanations, but so far there's a lot that has not been explained in a lot of these types of cases.
Now, you may laugh on the next question, but you're a little bit like an Indiana Jones, not necessarily wearing the hat, but on the other hand, maybe you have
I
um,
have actually.
fancy type of hat, and you've gotten a lot of grants. You've traveled a lot of around the world to a lot of countries, a lot of tribes. You've checked things out, we'll say, in a really cool fashion. Can you first encapsulate the number of trips you may have made for research purposes or personal to explore how many tribes you may have interacted with, or at least the type of research that you've done, how many continents and so on? Can you just give us a broad brush of your background there?
Yeah, because I'm a historian and I don't work with living people really, most of it has been Egyptological trips. I've been to Egypt 3 or 4 times. Um, I've been on a few excavations. I went on an excavation in Cyprus and Israel and the UK and the United Arab Emirates, and um, various kinds of research study tours of Egypt. Um, but otherwise, I haven't done actual anthropological field work, um, because, and I should explain the reason for that, methodologically, as far as my work goes. It's because I want to focus on eras when people didn't have a lot of contact with each other. So, for example, if you were to now go and talk to practically any tribe in the world, they're going to be influenced by Christianity or Islam or Buddhism or whatever. Whereas if I look at the 19th century accounts, the very first encounters with explorers in the 16th century, or the early anthropologists or missionaries going way back, then they're a lot less likely to have been, tainted by an external religion. And the reason that's important is because I'm trying to get at the most indigenous, most localized kind of expression of beliefs as possible.
Now, Joseph Campbell in The Power of Myth with Bill Moyers, they had some really interesting points that came up, just the intersection of different cultures that couldn't possibly know about each other. Jumping over to phenomenology, is that, though, something that if you felt like you hit a brick wall, a dead end in what you're currently doing now, is that something you could see doing, is going around to living tribes and still doing some research down the road, like a decade from now? Is it anything you are interested in as a back burner right now?
I am, in theory, it's interesting, but there's the
Mm.
linguistic problem, so I think it would have to be some kind of collaborative effort among, particular uh, local anthropologists in different parts of the world.
So if an institute
But
stepped in, unlimited funding, unlimited travel, you could just check those boxes. you might be convinced to get involved.
Sure, sure, yeah. I mean, there was actually I signed a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't say who it is, but somebody who facilitates these kinds of things with a lot of money asked me once if I had unlimited funds, what kind of project would I design? And this was specifically about proving an afterlife or that the soul can survive death. So my idea was to liaise with different anthropologists around the world and ask them, like, ones that specifically deal with religious experience and mediumship and shamanism, and ask them, like, who impressed you the most out of everybody that you've worked with. So find me like this one particular shaman who has an amazing reputation in Australia and one from Papua New Guinea, and get them all together, bring them to a lab facility in Europe or in the US, and have them kind of integrate their knowledge and wisdom with Western mediums and try to come up with like some almost foolproof technique for out-of-body experience type shamanism, otherworld journeying, and things like this, which could be tested in a laboratory. So they could actually test, out-of-body observations.
Well, it's hard to make anything foolproof because fools are so damn ingenious. And you remind
Yeah.
me of Jurassic Park. Luckily, no dinosaurs are involved. And I would say it sounds like Robert Bigelow trying to pull stuff together. And how about this? Can you talk to us about one of those moments, though, where you had a moment? You were in the bottom inside, you needed government permission, let's say in Egypt, to be at the innermost chamber down below inside the temple, where you had something that you really couldn't put in the book anywhere, any of your books, or any of your papers, or anything else. You really couldn't even mention it to colleagues at the time because you just couldn't classify it. It was a special moment. You felt something, it stayed with you over time, and maybe it makes sense today. Is there something you could share that's personal from a research moment when you were in Egypt or elsewhere?
That's an interesting question. Well, not related, just to deflect for 1 second. I
Yeah.
went to an excavation in Egypt, which was canceled at the last minute. Apparently, they do this sometimes. And all the gear was there. The entire staff from University College London was there. And suddenly, Supreme Council of Antiquities steps in and says, "Nope, you're not going to do it." So as a consolation prize, they gave us an all-access pass to every archaeological site in the country for a month. And that included things that were usually closed to the public. So we got to just, flash our pass and the guard would open gates. And so that was pretty amazing. And seeing some of those, especially the old Kingdom tombs at Saqqara, which are usually off limits. Some are open to the public, but a lot of them aren't. That was really kind of special feeling that reignited my interest and passion for these things. You feel a real connection.
Yeah.
Uh,
Can you talk about that connection? I mean, is it goosebumps? Is it everything? Is it just like, is there a part of you that's your soul is leaping, your inner creative self is leaping? Can you describe the feelings that you had in those moments?
yeah, it's a sort of combination of the religious studies scholars, especially of the past, Rudolf Otto and people like this would talk about this feeling of awe to the point where it's almost horror, because you're so overwhelmed with this sense of awe. But it's also this humbling kind of experience because of you're in a sacred space where that so many people thousands of years ago went to so much effort to maintain as a sacred, to create as a sacred space, and then to seal it off as a sacred space forever. And then you're in there. So you kind of feel like on the one hand, maybe you shouldn't be, but on the other hand, I don't have any ill intentions. So there's a kind of there's a connection and maybe a oneness with the feeling of what's going on, but there's also this the feeling of awe, which is ineffable, really. It's difficult to explain.
Brilliant. Okay, now I'm going to jump because culturally we've jumped a little bit these days in society. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about Europe, Australia, Canada, US. There's discussion about, hey, maybe mankind is not the only, being or the name of the game, the only shop in town in the whole universe. Maybe there are other beings, blah, blah, blah. And there's something called UAP, UFO disclosure efforts. There's a huge rabbit hole people are going down, chasing facts, FOIA requests, you name it. We're relying on governments, private companies, and others to share what they know. It could be 50 years. Who knows? This has been going on
Mhm.
also going on for 75 years. But if we go back to indigenous cultures, there's a lot of beliefs that we are not alone. We've gotten a lot of help and so on. Can you talk to us about your exposure to this, how you've handled it, where you are today, given the current cultural push towards more openness, and maybe we are not alone? Where are
Mhm.
you falling as sort of a scientist researcher on this whole thing? And again, not that you need to share anything personally experience wise, but were you in the Australian outback at any point and looking up at the sky and you can't explain what you saw, or you just have a feeling that it's always bigger than we think it is because it's not about thinking? How does Gregory describe all this?
Um, I guess the same way I kind of approach other stuff when I was talking about belief earlier. Uh, I I feel like I don't know. I do feel like because of the vastness of the universe and the cosmos, I think there's got to be some other planet that has life on it that's probably intelligent. Whether they've been here, that's the thing that I'm just not sure about. And I know we're in the situation where we've got people from NASA and these government figures coming out and talking about disclosure. But when you listen carefully, all of them, no matter how certain they are, it's all based on something that they've been told. Um, Very few of them are actually saying, I saw this with my own eyes and I have this physical, tangible evidence. So until that happens, I kind of keep my, one foot in the skeptical camp. As far as the ancient world goes, this is, when I was a kid, I read like Chariots of the Gods and Flying Saucers in the Bible and these kinds of books, and I was really fascinated with them. And then when I started doing archaeology, actually for my bachelor's degree, there was a kind of a class that we did on archaeology and politics and the way that the past is used and misused in different cultures. Um, and that includes this idea that sort of everything that Westerners feel like we don't understand how they built it, it must have been aliens. So, for example, the pyramids is the obvious one. And the kind of political social issue problem with that is that it always kind of presupposes that these, others were not capable of the kinds of technology um, that they showed that they were capable of. So therefore, uh, it must have been aliens. And that's really kind of a racist way to look at it. And there's actually a popular internet meme that said, just because white people couldn't do it doesn't mean it was aliens. And it's kind of silly way of putting it, but there's some truth in that. So when I started doing archaeology in the kind of university setting, I went back to these books like Flying Saucers in the Bibles and in the Bible and Chariots of the Gods, um, and looked at it from the perspective of what archaeologists, professional archaeologists, actually had to say about it. At that time, maybe 20 years ago, they hadn't really engaged in it very much. I think that's changing a little bit now with pushing back against people like Graham Hancock or whatever. But it turns out that there's really isn't any solid, um, evidence in the favor of that these were aliens. So there's always either a cultural indigenous explanation that counters that, or a kind of more logical explanation um, that's more aligned with the actual culture that we're looking at. So, which is again not to say that there weren't aliens, and I mean a lot of people say that these kinds of descriptions of gods, especially like in Egypt with animal-headed deities or whatever, could be descriptions actually of aliens rather than what we think of as gods. But that's the thing it's not able to be tested. It's just kind of that's again where you fall into the belief, disbelief, or neutrality kind of camp.
But you find it fascinating from sort of a passion standpoint, the diversity of what you're seeing with these different cultures, tribes, and so on. You definitely find it interesting.
For sure, yeah. And I just it's just that when people come up with an explanation and believe in it, like, oh, it's extraterrestrials. It's like, well, I don't know if it's extraterrestrials or if it's souls of the dead in another dimension, or if it's some other kind of, interdimensional being or if it's hallucination. I just don't know. So
Yeah. Okay. If you did get that ticket punched, unlimited budget, you would have to interact with the living tribes, though, even if they've been
yeah,
influenced now and they're spoiled. Um,
right.
where would you want to go? Is it Papua New Guinea? Is it Australia, the Outback? And this is assuming cooperation from the actual tribe itself. Where
Yeah.
personally do you Peru? And you could pick a few spots if you wanted to. Where would you, if again the ticket was punched, you could go anywhere, and you'd have 20 postdocs helping you out with the note taking. What would be the ideal kind of 3 spots around the globe trip where you'd be like, okay, let's dive into this?
Yeah, I think I would do 3 spots, you said?
Yeah.
I think I'd do a Australian Aborigine shaman. Um, it's a difficult choice between Native American whose NDEs are really embedded into a lot of Native American afterlife beliefs. So either that or maybe a Mexican Huichol shaman. And then maybe someone from South America, just to get a kind of broad culture. Actually, no, a Tibetan. It would be a
Okay.
Tibetan, Australian, and someone from one of the Americas. I'd have to figure.
Interesting. Now, personally, and you don't have to answer this if it's not a proper question for a scientist researcher type, but ayahuasca, is it something that you could talk about? Obviously, it's very popular today, but is it something that, let's say, 5 years from now, you feel like you've published everything you could possibly want to publish? You don't care if people find out that you did it. I mean, you haven't done it in the past. I'm not advocating ayahuasca personally. I feel like you can get around it and get the same effect by just asking the universe to help. That's my personal opinion. But
Hmm.
ayahuasca, how do you feel about that? And you certainly know someone these days who's done it and shared an experience.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing about ayahuasca because I know some really level-headed scholars who have done it and said, okay, I don't know what it was I saw, but those insectoid, weird interdimensional beings were real, and they're completely convinced
And you're
that
talking
they.
about Aaron Rodgers, I know.
I'm not, no. No, there's another one, at least one other one. But also there's a research scholar in the UK named Pascal Michael, and he recently got his PhD comparing DMT and near-death experience types of experiences. And he did find that a lot of the people who have the drug experiences, at first they're totally convinced that they were real, but as time passes, they start thinking, I don't know, it was probably just a hallucination. Whereas with near-death experiences, the feeling that it was real never goes away. So to me, that's kind of maybe an indication of the reality of one experience versus the hallucinatory quality of another. Maybe it's getting you into the same type of altered state as a near-death experience, but maybe you're not quite. It's not the same experience. It's maybe somehow similar.
Okay, now Native American tribes in the US and so on, or Canada as well. Um, who have you really appreciated? Is it Black Elk simply because he coughed up the goods, a lot of details? Is it near? I can't pronounce the name. Newhart, maybe, who caught everything. The colorized version. I have 3 copies behind me, but I'm forgetting what it is. The Diary of Black Elk. I'm ruining the name of it. But you
Black
could
Elk Speaks.
Black Elk Speaks. Thank you very much. But I also know that not that it angered other Native Americans because he really did share a lot. And I'll first just say, Black Elk is wonderful and absolutely available to folks today if people want to meet him and listen to him. What's your favorite area? And again, I'm going to mispronounce the Hopi tribe. The
Yeah.
Hopis, Black Elk. Could you just lay out maybe 3 or 4 areas that you just absolutely enjoy reading about, studying, and so on, and why?
Yeah, I don't think I would specify a particular area, but what was so fascinating in fact, I have a great example. You mentioned Black Elk. He actually started out having an NDE. I mean, it's in the Black Elk Speaks book, and his whole kind of a shamanic status was rooted in that, and that's the case for a lot of Native American shamans. And I'll just, if I can just read a little bit of this one, it's really,
Please. And his parents were concerned about like, hey, our kid's like basically paralyzed, dying. And the medicine man recognized what was going on and didn't want to, didn't share exactly what was going on with the parents at the time. But go read your thing.
yeah. So the Salish coastal people, the northwest coast, in 1881, there was a man named Squasaktun, which his English name was John Slocum, so we can call him that. Uh, so he died. He was confirmed dead by everybody there. And what's interesting about this is we again have this in his exact words. And he said, my breath was out and I died. All at once I saw a shining light, a great light, which was trying my soul. I looked and I saw that my body had no soul. I looked back at my own body and it was dead. And then he temporarily woke up and described again seeing his body while he was while his soul was outside of it. And then he dies again. And when he comes back, he says, I went to the judgment place of God. There was a great light in my soul from the good land. Before I came alive, I saw that I was a sinner. I saw an angel in heaven, and the angel said to me, "You must go back and turn alive again on earth." When I came alive, I told my friends, "Good thing in heaven, God is kind to us. If you all try hard and help me, we will all be better men on earth." So the couple things that are really interesting about this, one is that it led to the foundation of a new religion, which was the Indian Shaker Church, which is still in existence today. So we have an NDE, which is, directly leading to not just new beliefs in an afterlife, but an actual whole new religion. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that the local people uh, saw that John Slocum's experience, they saw it as a much more valuable source of information about the afterlife than they saw what the Christian missionaries were teaching them and what the Bible said. Um, so the Bible wasn't valued as a book of revelation. A contemporary historian at the time who was looking at this said they don't have the need for the Bible because John Slocum personally came back from a conference with the angels at the gates of heaven, and he imparted to them the actual facts and the angelic words as the means of salvation. They know there's a heaven because John Slocum was there, and they believe in a hell full of fire and punishment for sinners because the angel in heaven told them about it. So they refused to believe what the missionaries told them because they said, we're not even really going to believe what Jesus or told us or what you're telling us Jesus told you, because that was thousands of years ago. This guy just went there, last month or last year or whatever. So they had this source of direct revelation, which to them was much more valuable, which I think is it's really pretty rational and reasonable approach to take.
Swedenborg, something that also has been on your radar screen. Can you just address Swedenborg or people around Swedenborg and how you handle that, or is it not as relevant to your studies?
Yeah, not quite as relevant being a European immersed in, the kind of religious landscape that he was immersed in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, very interesting. I don't think he had technically any near-death experience because he didn't actually die. But he had visionary experiences that were very much analogous to NDEs, which is also interesting because you wonder, again, if they're accessing the same kind of reality without having to die as shamans around the world apparently do. Did he just kind of hit on shamanic techniques and it was entering the same kind of state of consciousness or what? But I guess it's the kind of thing that is untestable now.
Can we go to human nature for a second? There's just something called thinking. I think it's what all of us are doing, 87, 95% of our day. An angel once said 7% less thinking is the Olympic gold medal for all of us for just slowing down. It's not going away. This, thinking is fear, rejection, reacting, resisting, stress, worry, you name it. Knowing also, which is the big currency these days, knowing to the preclusion of possibility. I think another angel said if more people would listen, less conflict would result in any given situation. For me to remember anything is incredible. But what I'm trying to say is there's just something called thinking. you see it in the scientific circles. It's something you're up against. There's a lot of judging going on. It's like trying to hand out speeding tickets at the Indy 500. Good luck with that. How do you view it? Was it a little more liberal in the early 90s, late 90s? Were people more open to discoveries? Have you found that in the last 3 or 4 years, people have tightened up more, maybe because of the pandemic? Is it the opposite? Are people more open now? Or you were like, no, 12 years ago was about right. That was the heyday. We were always exploring any new idea. And I mean, are their resistance levels higher, lower, or more people open searching now in the scientific research communities? What's your take on where humanity is in this pendulum swinging, or is it something else, a spiral?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think, I mean, since I've been in the humanities rather than the sciences, I've seen a definite decline in open-mindedness and interest in this kind of thing. I mean, most of I've been kind of academically situated in the UK, so that's where I've done all my work. And I've seen, departments of mysticism close. I did my PhD at University of Wales in Lampeter, which was a tiny, tiny university, but had the largest religious studies department in Europe with, scholars in pretty much every
Hmm.
speciality of religious studies. And you could do death and immortality. You could do, they had classes on Rastafarianism and all this stuff just across the board. And most of that's gone now. I think you
Hmm.
can still do religious experience there, but for the most part, with the humanities taking a hit, all these things that don't demonstrate impact in the modern world, which usually means money, or technological advance, that's all kind of gets defunded and falls by the wayside. Um, One thing that's interesting was that the when I was still in archaeology, they seemed a little bit more open-minded and accepting of my near-death experience malarkey. Um, But when I went into religious studies, at Wales, they were good, but the kind of wider field of religious studies, there's this attitude that you're smuggling crypto theology into the field because it's supposed to be this, secular anthropological style look at religions where, we're not religion. We don't believe in anything. We're just looking at what they believe,
Hmm.
which is actually how I approach it. But the whole idea that there could be a type of experience that could be seen as religious, that could have a spiritual import to people around the world was seen as really threatening. And it actually cost me jobs and funding. And I got a lot of,
Huh.
dismissive and kind of ridiculing comments from reviewers. So, so I would say in the humanities, if anything, it's gotten worse. But as far as wider culture, I think it's probably more popular than maybe it's ever been. But unfortunately, in a really kind of uncritical way. I think there's just like anything on the internet, people will kind of die on any hill that they can find.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, describe to us your resilience, your positivity, your professionalism, and so on. If you don't mind complimenting yourself on air, you put your chin up and you knew you had a very unique, special life path ahead, and you love what you do, and you know others enjoy it, and you're helping others. But can you do it in your own words, Gregory? Why you can just let it be like water off a duck's back and keep moving forward, no matter what rejection you get?
Yeah, part of it is probably a little childish. Part of it's, well, I'll show them.
Hey.
Um, but a lot of it is just belief in what I'm doing, and seeing gaps in the whole history of research in ancient religions, in religious studies, in anthropology. There have been, hints here and there. You can go back to the 19th century and find descriptions of, Andrew Lang is a good example, the guy who wrote the fairy books, British scholar. He wrote the Green Fairy Book, the Pink Fairy Book, and all these. So he did children's books of fairy tales, but then he did kind of armchair anthropology. And he writes something like, afterlife beliefs around the world seem to be rooted in the experiences of people who died and came back and reported visions that they had seen. And this is, almost 100 years before Raymond Moody, before the term near-death experience even existed. So on the one hand, it's been really interesting to find these little references embedded throughout the history of scholarship. But at the same time, it's been even more interesting to observe how none of it made any impact. Like you don't find any kind of mainstream comparative religion books, even somebody like Joseph Campbell, nobody said like, look at the centrality of near-death experiences
That was it.
in the way people believe in an afterlife. And I feel like, especially with my second book, the one on indigenous religions, I demonstrated it. I proved it on in a wide scale sort of way, especially for Native Americans, but also for the Pacific, Polynesians and Melanesians, especially. That this is not speculation. This isn't some new agey, airy fairy woo woo thing of saying, "Oh, near-death experiences is all love and light." It's like examples verbatim from explorers, anthropologists, and missionaries, where these people are telling them, we believe this because so and so went there and died and came back. So
Mhm.
to deny that is basically being ethnocentric. It's calling the people we're studying liars. It's being
Mhm.
racist. Um, so the tables have kind of turned, and I'm hoping to kind of um, be the one to continue doing the turning. But as always in academia, the response to something that's new and challenging to the current paradigms is to ignore it.
Yep.
So,
Well, thinking seems to be a little bit of a circular firing squad, if you ask me, because, and I've got to do a quick public service announcement in that Raymond Moody, his compatriot who co-wrote the book, I'm blanking on the name right now, who's got the knighted in Portugal, Paul or Peter, I'm forgetting his name. They've been a guest on the show. They were the very last episode in 2023. If people watching this want to check that out, Dr. Evan Alexander, Ingrid Hankala, Michelle Clare, who had 3 near-death experiences. We've had about, I'd say, a couple dozen folks with near-death experiences out of the 170 something shows booked into 2025. We've gone to 3 shows a week, folks. Please comment on what you've been enjoying Gregory sharing with us. Hit that like button, subscribe, and also share. We're not hitting huge numbers. We've gone to like 3,500 views for a show with Lorna Byrne, the Irish angel mystic, and maybe 300 to 800 views for other folks. But lately, going to 3 shows a week, we're getting a little penalized in the penalty box. By the time you see this, hopefully we're up into the hundreds again or thousands. Do share this with someone, and please comment on what you've enjoyed Gregory sharing with us. Give him a compliment. He has stuck it out for you. He writes these books. His passion is clear and apparent for all to see. Jumping back onto the topic we were on, do you feel it's as bad as being Rosa Parks in the 1950s on the bus? It's not quite that bad.
no,
No.
no, definitely not. Um, it definitely has had an impact on my career. But I can ride the bus. I can drink at any drinking fountain or whatever.
Okay. Yeah,
So yeah.
I'll add to throw myself under the bus. I mean, I've used the Rosa Parks example for my thing because I hand people a direct experience and they can do it in a group. So it's group seeing, group feeling, and everything else. But I've had a Watkins, I think it's a Watkins 100 list. I've had a person I was super excited to talk to, but they made it 4 minutes in and they were like, click, not possible. And
Mm,
I've had another person, head of a very famous organization. And these are folks that other guests on the show sing their praises during the show. Uh,
hmm.
and so I've had a head of another organization who are like, hey, I'll accept the LinkedIn connection, but never contact me. So
Right.
it's not, it's definitely, there are different levels of reality, different levels of awareness and consciousness. And I've never met anybody running around who says, I'm going to be wrong for this
Mhm.
entire day, this entire week, month, or year. And I
Right.
don't know anybody who says, I'm going to go waste my energy with my belief system. So I love what Ananda Mayama said, everyone's right. But there's a lot of negotiation that goes on.
Yeah.
So with that, can you talk to us about your next book project or 5 that you would be willing to share out loud? Is there a particular cross section of topics that you want to tackle and maybe rope together? Or is it back to Egypt? Where do you think you might be headed with the next project?
Yeah, with a PhD on near-death experience in classical antiquity, the ultimate result of that is going to be a book. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It's a really interesting project. And that's, one of the things that keeps me going, aside from just near-death experiences is the cross-cultural stuff. I don't think I would be as immersed and dedicated to this kind of thing if I were dealing with living people in my own culture. You know,
Yes. Yes.
it's that there's always some new cultural area to explore. So yeah, that'll be a few years to go. I've actually rewritten my first book, which was well, the current title is going to be Near-Death Experience in Ancient Civilizations, and that's the one that deals with Egypt, Mesopotamia, China, India, and Mesoamerica. So it's a broad cross-cultural comparison of their afterlife beliefs, but looked at in light of near-death experiences. I'm just doing the final copy editing revision of that. And of course, being me, I thought, no, it needs a new chapter. So, so I'm writing a new chapter on later Egyptian near-death experience accounts in literature. And in Herodotus, he describes an Egyptian king who had an NDE. So these kinds of things, which again, they've been scattered around, but nobody's brought them together and said, okay, look at these in the context of NDEs.
Interesting.
Yeah, and then I've got a historical anthology of near-death experiences, which I've been working on for a few years now, but it is kind of on hold. And that's just going to be basically, at first I wanted to do all the historical and cross-cultural near-death experiences I could find, like the actual accounts verbatim in one volume. And the more I searched and collected, I realized there's no way that would be like, 6 volumes or something. So I think it's going to be like, greatest hits of cross-cultural and historical NDEs. That'll probably be a few years away though.
And now with back to Greece, Italy, and so on, the current PhD, if there will be some travel, most likely, you'll hit up Greece and Italy.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah. There's especially there's a real relationship between near-death experiences and ancient mystery cults.
Hmm.
Um, so for example, in these cults, they have these installations that would either have an actual underground cave sanctuary or a dark space to kind of imitate the cave. And the idea was that they would go into this dark space, sometimes blindfolded. They would then be confronted with an appearance of a deity who was brightly lit. They would wander through this kind of space, and then they would emerge back into the brightness, which and the idea was that this was a rehearsal for dying, for what's going to happen in the afterlife. So I think it's essentially a kind of reenactment of a near-death experience. So I did visit a lot of these sites in the past, but I would like to go again and just kind of see the architectural and the physical space and how it might have worked in reality. It is very different than either my memory or looking at it on paper. So yeah, that would be good.
Okay, I'm going to put up, and again, I'm going to do the best I can to pronounce the author's name, but Holger Kalwait's book. And
Uh-huh.
this is a classic, is it not?
It is, yeah.
And can you just explain it relative to, your understanding of all the different rich texts that make for good reading? I'll take a shot at it for 10 seconds. It just covers a lot of incredible indigenous traditions and belief systems around the globe, whether it's an indigenous seal hunter far side of Russia and what they would do to talk with the seal spirits before the season's hunting would begin to sort of
Mhm.
strike an amazing deal to have a productive hunting season, to the jungles of Latin America and everywhere else. Just beautifully written book, very rich. But what's your take on it? Because you're the one who's in a much better place to do some judging here.
Yeah, that, and he also has a book, Shamanism, the title. I can't remember The Way of the Shaman, something like that. And he was one of the anthropologists who wrote about near-death experience being the origins of an afterlife belief, and he really articulated that in one of his books, which was a really a good thing to find. He I wish I could find the quote, but you just kind of had to flip through and I don't see it. But it's a very succinct example of people around the world have these experiences and they come back and not just talk about what it was like in the other world and that influences our afterlife beliefs, but there's an actual transformative kind of aspect to these experiences, and not just personally transformative, the way we see them, like being a very individualistic society, people have NDEs come back and it's all about their own transformation. But in small scale and in indigenous societies, it's a transformation on behalf of the community. And I think Conway discusses that a bit, that they bring the benefits of the transformation into this into their community. And I've found lots of examples of that to kind of substantiate it. For example, they'll find they'll be given like a healing herb in the other world, which they bring back. Sometimes it's even described as physically bringing it back in a container. But I think we need to look at it in terms of they brought back the knowledge, and then they'll go and find this medicine, and it helps cure the tribe. So that sort of thing.
Brilliant. Well, that is one of our final questions. But before we get to the final question, which I'll leave with you now to buy you a little bit of time to think about it, it is going to the concept of consciousness, compassion, awareness, and that it isn't just about one person, but their field, their presence, their awakeness, anything you want to call it, does impact others. It's beyond words, whatever you want to call that, intangible, tough for science, tough for research, tough for everyone else to put their finger on. But that's kind of the point of it. It can't get to it from here. Sort of like the UFO UAP thing, it has to be from here. I'd make the argument that that's the case. What I wanted to do was sage. This is a staple on every show. I light some sage. People, it doesn't matter if you're in Germany, New Zealand, and it's 2030 when we've got now, 25 million audience, and we're on our 60,000th view, if I can say that correctly, for this particular show. But I'm going to light some sage. It doesn't matter where you are. You can catch that sage. We've done this before, so I'm outing Gregory. We've done this previous to the show. But some people start to taste it when I light it. Just consider it energy, and there's no time and space quite the way we think. The smoke, leave your eyes on the smoke. If you don't mind, ask the universe, angels to bring it to you. Literally and linearly smell some sage smoke. But if you want to go crazy, ask for some flowers that only have value to you. Rosa rugosa if you love Nantucket, honeysuckle, lavender, hyacinth, something that has meaning. If you've been to Bora Bora, that one particular flower, you haven't smelled it in a decade. What are you going to allow for is the real crux or the rub for all of us going through our day-to-day existence. And I would just make the point, a little more kindness and gentleness goes a long way. Gregory, what are you getting in California right now?
As far as the sage goes,
Yeah, getting a little sage on air. There's no pressure now.
no pressure at all.
Nope. And I had Lorna Burns say, Mike, I'm not smelling the sage. And I was like, oh boy, first time I've struck out. She goes, but I am getting daisies and roses. And I was like, whew. Jennifer McLean, the 35-year healer, was like getting sage and 3 types of flowers. Breathe and relax, give yourself permission, ask however you want to roll with the lingo for whatever exists just outside of thinking. Ask for it to come in and help carry the fragrance of the lit sage and or flowers and or ocean smell. If you are absolutely already a regular on the show, you should have already by now seen a guest who's gotten the trifecta, or you yourself have experienced it. I got guests typing in, hey, I just smelled the flowers, the sage. And I'm like, because then there's all the hate mail that offsets it 10-1 right now. But that will change over time as well. Okay, catch a little bit of sage. Are you catching any sage? I bought you enough time.
I have a window open and there's a pine tree outside, so maybe.
Maybe. Perfect. I love it. You're safe. Okay, I'm gonna stub this out. I will put up one photo of one angel, a pink ball of light, joy. And then we'll go to the big question to wrap up the interview, which is just about compassion, kindness, walking a smoother path, how you handle your energy, the difference between up here and down here. I do have to find that photo. Give me 1 second. Okay. Yeah, she was hiding. Okay, an actual photo of an angel. Now, historical photos of Audrey Hepburn have moved for folks. A wink. We know a historical photo can't move. Now, call this what you will, but it's light energy form. It's moved. It's pulsed for folks. If people want to put their hand up, they can feel the vibe on their hand. We do this a lot more on other versions of the show with other guests. No pressure for Gregory here, but if you want to catch a few words from Joy, a reminder of another chapter of your life to share with us about your passion, looking at the history of mankind, and just get a little bell ringing on some last area before we hit the compassion, kindness part, where mankind is headed with awareness coming on the horizon for mankind. Are you getting anything from Joy as a reminder for us all?
Um, I guess I'm thinking just as far as the messages from near-death experiences go, that it's nobody comes back from an NDE in these historical accounts saying, I need to start a war on my neighboring country, or I need to create more division in the world. The
Hmm.
message is always about positivity, helping people, healing, community benefit. So um, that I think, and as far as in the relating it to William James, the famous father of Western psychology, who was also a parapsychologist, by the way, he talked about the fruits of religious experience and argued that the genuineness of a religious experience is measurable by the fruits. By their fruits you shall know them. So if we look at near-death experiences in that sort of way, they have this tangible benefit, whatever you want to believe about them.
Okay, has there been one figure that you've either directly interviewed, you've just read interviews about that person, they may not be alive anymore, that's definitely impacted you? You still kind of flash to them as the, if anybody remembers the Uncle Sam poster, I Want You, that would represent America, Uncle Sam. Who's the poster child or two figures that you're like really embody what you were just describing? That you just feel like, and they would be part of that 6 volume, the NDE history. They'd be your standout, like 1, 2, or 3 case studies.
Um, Actually, first thing that came to mind is not a particular case study, but a Swedish scholar named Ake Hultkrantz, and he wrote a book called The Native American Orpheus Tradition. And I think the reason he came to mind was because not only, once again, this is 1957, again before Raymond Moody and the term near-death experience, he identified NDEs as a particular type of experience distinct from dreams, and saw that Native Americans valued them more than dreams as far as information and wisdom about the other world. But what I liked about him was he wrote with a sort of wry sense of humor, a little bit, but also with just a real compassion and open-mindedness and acceptance and support. But at the same time, he remained the objective anthropologist. He also wrote a book about Native American peyote history. And as part of that research, he underwent a peyote trip himself. And the description of that is just, it's hilarious. I mean, it's so charming and funny, but also really respectful because he talks about how horrible it tasted and he was trying to hide it from them and they kept saying, no, no. Um, and he was then grateful that he did it. But just the point being that, you know, the compassion, the inspiration that he had, that he continually gained from the people he was studying, the respect he showed for them, but also this dedication to scholarly rigor and to not. I've seen it with some scholars anyway, especially in parapsychology. Once they cross the threshold into full-on belief, like their critical faculties and their rigor in their research kind of goes out the window. And this was somebody who that didn't happen to. So that's inspiring to me.
I love it. And I'm going to mention Karl Hammerschlag because that's what just came to mind. He has since passed, I'd say maybe 5 years ago now. He was very tight with the doctor who wore the nose, the clown nose. I'm blanking on his name, but there was the movie that was made with the comedian Robin Williams playing that doctor. Patch Adams is who I was trying to think of.
Oh, okay.
But I had reached out to Karl Hammerschlag. Unfortunately, when he had a diagnosis, he knew he was going to pass. He's got 2 books out at least, Dancing Healers and Theft of Spirit. He came out of Yale Medical School as a doctor, and back when the Indian Bureau of Affairs existed, he was assigned to, a reserve somewhere. And really, the local folk just went to the hospital when nothing else was going to work. They went there to basically die. And so he thought he knew it all. He had a lot of very strong beliefs and hates. And eventually, a medicine man took him under, his wing and showed him there was more to the world than his education had led him to believe. Later, he became a either psychologist, psychotherapist, I believe psychologist. So he doubled essentially, and he ended up having to shed most of what he knew and learned a whole nother form of healing. And he also taught it to communities to pass on. Very
Mhm.
big, generous heart, but it reminded me of Karl Hammerschlag a little bit. Just
Okay.
beautiful books. They'll make you cry one chapter and laugh the next. You know, not everybody has a happy ending, but a smooth transition to the other side.
Mhm.
Very deep, deep author. Is there a last parting area that you would want to share with us, and where you hope, you know, your work, how it impacts people in the years ahead? Because I feel like you still have a bunch of shoes to drop here for your career, a bunch of areas to still explore.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I think I guess there are two sides of it. One is, as I said, trying to change the academic discussion. And I mean that not only in history of religions and anthropology, but also in near-death studies, because it's frustrating to me to see, my first book was published in 2009, and I've published in this area different articles in, Journal of Near-Death Studies, which I know the science NDE researchers read. So my work is in the public domain for different researchers. Um, but I still keep seeing articles about things like uh, scientists have discovered that at the moment of death, there's a burst of brain activity. That must be evidence that the brain is creating the life review during a near-death experience, because all the boundaries of the brain cells are interrupted at that point, and there's this flood of memories, and so we can explain it by this physiological process. But if they had read my books, they would they would have discovered that the life review is not universal. Like not everybody who has an NDE actually has a life review. In indigenous religions, especially, they're practically unknown. There's a couple of sort of symbolic examples. So in that sense, my work can challenge these kind of biological, physiological interpretations of NDEs. But then, of course, that raises the question of, if we don't always have the same NDEs, if we don't always have a life review, then why do some people have them and why do some don't?
Mm.
So anyway, there's that side of it, as far as it, hoping it will have an impact on near-death studies in a broader sense, as well as in the humanities, but also in a personal sense. And this is one of the reasons I come on to shows like yours, and I do parapsychology interviews and things like that, because I feel like, why even do this research if it's just this rarefied academic thing that only 10 people are going to read? So I'm trying to kind of get this work out there a little bit more. And part of the reason for that is because a lot of people have these, what's known as toxic theology beliefs about the afterlife. And a lot of people in this day and age still are terrified about dying.
Mm.
If they're brought up in, super rigorous religious community that preaches, if you touched yourself in the wrong way, you're going to go to hell, or whatever it is. Um, and people still have these kind of deep fears embedded in them. And I know people who haven't even been practicing Catholics for decades, and they still will say, like, but is this going to happen? So I'm hoping, that maybe seeing these examples of people who have had near-death experiences around the world, nobody says that. There are a few negative examples here and there, but for the most part, nobody is saying, like, I did this one bad thing and therefore I'm going to go to hell and suffer for the rest of my life. When there are negative experiences, it's usually something that's temporary that you have to kind of learn and realize, and then you can transcend and then go on to the next stage of enlightenment. So I guess it's I would like it to be able to reduce some people's fear of death.
Now, t-shirt version to close us out. We'll call it a mantra, not a mudra, because we'll do this for the mudra at the end of the show. But what would be the quickest, what you've learned that keeps your chin up, something that makes the world go round, makes us shine here? Not to make it like a Coca-Cola or M&M commercial either, but what's something that's uplifting that you want to leave us with, that you think about mankind, humanity, the kindness, love, compassion thing? What's the most upbeat statement you can give us?
Um, not to be too much of a one-track mind, but I would go back to the message from near-death experiences, and especially the fact that, why would people at the end of their life, when they're dying, when there's, as far as anybody knows, and sometimes did die, medically speaking, why would they have an experience that is makes them filled with compassion and love and community mindedness and wanting to bring back these positive messages of hope and oneness with people. To me, that's, an interesting thing that maybe it speaks to something that I don't understand. I'll put it that way.
I love it. It can't be discounted.
Yeah.
Gregory, thank you so much for being on Angels, Positivity, and Love. Total treat to have you on. You're just such a wonderful guest. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Michael.